Crazy, right? We're the world's most efficient volume producer of quality ag goods, and we were in deficit. That doesn't make any sense. But we've already cut that down significantly in the Trump administration. We're going to keep going that direction.
I'm Carson Jorgensen. And this is the Carson Jorgensen Podcast. Hey everybody, thanks for joining me today. Today I have a pretty special guest with me, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. Ambassador Greer is serving as the 20th United States Trade Representative. We're going to talk all things trade and tariffs today. So thank you for joining me, Ambassador Greer. I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate you taking the time to do it. And honestly, I appreciate everything that the administration's been doing on the trade front. Your office has been extremely great to work with on the agricultural front, so we truly do appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to hear that. At U.S. Trade Representative, it used to be that someone in my spot, if you ask them, what are you trying to do? They'd say something like, oh, I'm trying to get a trade agreement with X country or whatever, and I'm going to lower U.S. tariffs to do it. That is obviously the total opposite of what we're doing, which is we're trying to protect American production, whether it be in ag, like you guys, or manufacturing. And if there's going to be a trade deal, it's going to be the other side that's going to reduce their tariffs for us.
Yeah, no, and that's really, I hate to see that so many people get caught up on the mainstream media and all the junk that's out there, because there's so many good things happening behind the scene. And that's what people don't understand. And what I appreciate about what you're doing is they don't understand that tariffs were meant to protect domestic industry. And in the sheep industry, which I appreciate your 201 that you guys announced last week, we've been working on that with your office for quite some time now, and we appreciate that going forward. But it's a protectionary thing. 76% of the lamb consumed in the United States comes from a different country. And that's something that you guys are reducing. So how do you see this going forward, not just for the sheep industry, but for the country as a whole?
Well, when you look at this issue, the trade deficit is really a good proxy for this, right? The trade deficit being the difference between what we export and what we import. And so by the time we got to the end of the Biden administration, our trade deficit in goods was $1.2 trillion. That meant that we were consuming $1.2 trillion more well, not consuming, but importing $1.2 trillion more than what we were exporting. It's totally out of whack and out of balance. Trade is actually supposed to be balanced, right? Some years you might be in surplus, some years in deficit for a variety of reasons, but to have this structural thing going on for a long time doesn't make sense. And what's crazy is during the last years of the Biden administration, we had a trade deficit in agricultural goods. We're like
I was just going to go there.
Crazy, right? We're the world's most efficient volume producer of quality ag goods, and we were in deficit. That doesn't make any sense. But we've already cut that down significantly in the Trump administration. We're going to keep going that direction.
Yeah, when President Trump left office, for anybody listening, when President Trump left office, we were running a $4 billion trade surplus. And by the time the Biden administration had finished, we were running a $54 billion deficit in agricultural commodities. And if you took corn and soybean out of our export categories, it was more like $120 billion.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And now, I think in the first few months of this year, our ag deficit is maybe, $6 billion or something. But in the last month of the Biden presidency, it was $6 billion in 1 month, right? So we've really cut that down. And part of it is through, one, doing the protections you're talking about. And then the other piece is opening exports for other producers and that kind of thing. And we are really focused on having American production because it's food security, right? It's not just trade in a vacuum, it's food security.
Well, it's national security. I mean, a country that can't feed itself, can't defend itself, and really is it a country at all? I mean, that's the argument we have with Canada all the time.
Yes.
If you can't feed yourself and are reliant on other countries, are you actually a country? And so as far as ag goes, I mean, USDR and USDA, they're both set up by law to focus on export promotion. That's kind of always been the thing. Ag sector exports aren't really in the cards. We're just trying to hold on to a sliver of our home market right now. And the 201 safeguards, they're a short-term Band-Aid, and they really help. And it's what we've been pushing for so that we can really look into that in the sheep industry. Are there any other tools that could help farmers and ranchers protect their home market? Agriculture, we haven't really seen 232 investigations. Do you see that changing at all? Or do you see any other tools that we could use moving forward for ag to protect that market share, to make sure we don't lose what's left of our American farmers and ranchers?
Sure. Well, the first part of this is recall we've actually, separate from the 201 safeguard, we've already had some level of tariffs on place on foreign lamb
Yeah.
since last April, right? I mean,
Yep.
it's
I think
anywhere
we're
from 10% or
15%.
more. Yeah,
Yep.
exactly right. So we've had that, which is probably not everything you need, but it's something. So that's
No,
in
but it is
place.
helping. I will tell you that it is helping.
Good. Good. And then we have the Safeguard 201, which is a legal process, right? It'll go through the International Trade Commission, which
Yep.
is an independent agency, and they'll make recommendations sometime in the fall and actions possible there. And then there are other things we're doing. And, you tell me if I'm kind of, going off into left field here, but when I think of the sheep and lamb industry, I think you also have wool attached to that,
Sure.
right? And we've seen a huge decline in the wool and textile industry in America, and we now have tariffs on a lot of stuff coming from Asia, and we're trying to reestablish Western Hemisphere American protection for textiles here in the United States, including wool. So I think we're trying to get at all different parts of the supply chain to enhance protection here.
Yeah, no, and I think you're doing it. I think you're doing it absolutely the right way. And that kind of brings us to another point that I think a lot of people miss is with manufacturing and things like that, it can be rebuilt over the course of a few years. But when you lose agriculture, it's gone. I mean, houses are built over farms, grazing ground is gone. And so I appreciate this administration's protectionary tariffs to really protect the American ag and the American ag sector and the ranchers. What do you see moving forward? I mean, it's a big thing to move, and I feel for you. But what do you see moving forward for American agriculture as far as trade goes? Do we kind of insulate ourselves now and try to keep that product here, grow that market, or we try to hunt for exports? What do you think is the best way going forward?
Well, I think it depends on the sector within ag, right? We
Yeah,
say ag, but I mean that word contains multitudes, right? So, for one thing, the current ag situation we have is bizarre. In the United States, we like to consume protein, whether it be beef or lamb or poultry or whatever. But our beef herd's at the smallest it's ever been. You guys are under pressure, and we do a lot of row crop. We do
yeah,
a lot of row crops, which is great and good, and we're part of the breadbasket of the world. But at the same time, we end up dependent on other countries like China to buy a lot of that ag. And we want to sell to China. We want to have those exports. That's fine. But we don't want to be hostage to China because of those
yeah.
sales. And then we're dealing with someone like Brazil, right, who backfills for us. Like if China cuts us off of soybeans, Brazil just backfills. And
Hmm.
by the way, Brazil's also putting beef into the market here. So it's this kind of odd situation that grows up from international trade, and that's why we have some skepticism. Now, at the same time, we're super competitive in ag, and so in some sectors we should export, we should have sales. That helps underwrite the value proposition for the family farm. But then there are other folks like you're talking about where we should make for consumption here, right? I mean, that's what and that goes to food security, it goes to economic security, and that's how I think we should focus on it. If we can get export markets, help people diversify so they're not focused in one market or can't be held hostage by one foreign power, then that's a good thing, right? We should diversify it, and I think try to enhance sales right here in the United States.
Yeah, no, I agree with you wholly. And that brings us to another point, which is people say, well, why can't they compete with everybody else around the world when it comes to agriculture? Why can't you produce it as cheap as somewhere? Why when I go to Costco is lamb half price of the American? And there's a lot of nuances to that. But one thing we've noticed in ag is we're held to a certain standard, and that's a USDA thing, especially in the red meat category and the poultry, pork, all of those. They're held to a really high standard, but yet we're importing stuff from other countries that we don't even know where it's coming from. And that's something that I've seen hurting domestic ranchers and domestic farmers as much as anything, is we're competing against really cheap labor, sometimes slave labor, unethical practices as far as ag goes. How do we go about protecting our country from those practices?
So one thing I've been doing, I have these investigations I conduct under Section 301. You were talking
Yeah,
about Section 201, which are safeguards. Section 301 deals with these unfair trading practices. There's one I'm conducting right now regarding forced labor, which you just referred
yeah,
to. And so what I'm doing, like in the United States, we don't allow you to import something if it was made in whole or import with forced labor. And that's been on the books for 100 years, and we
Yeah.
enforce it quite rigorously. No one else in the world enforces it. You have a handful of countries that have laws, but they don't really enforce them. And so President Trump and myself, we've said, listen, we're not going to tolerate this anymore because there's a labor arbitrage that goes on, right? It impacts the cost, really, is what, is it a human rights issue? Sure. But it's also an economic issue. And we can't compete if other people are allowing goods made with forced labor to circulate in international trade. And so we're telling people, you have to change this practice. You have to eliminate this from global trade. Otherwise, there will be a penalty. We've proposed tariffs on countries that don't adjust for this problem. And so that's one tool we're using to try to get at this arbitrage.
Yeah, and that's the 301 investigations, correct?
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, and that's one thing I've noticed more now than ever before is we are enforcing these more and more. And you're seeing great prices, but going back to what you said about the cattle herd being in its lowest around, prior to World War II, there were 56 million sheep in the United States. Now there's less than 5 million sheep in the United States. Yet our country's grown by nearly a third since then. And we have more people to feed all the time, and we're getting less and less people to do so. And so I appreciate the administration treating this as the national security risk that it is. And is that something that you see this administration going forward putting more emphasis on, is that national security side of food security?
So that's a good question. We certainly think of it that way. That there's this notion out there. Some people will have a discussion with me. Argument's probably a better word. Well,
Yeah.
they'll say, well, national security, it's only about the highest tech semiconductor chips and the most advanced medicines. Like, that's it, right? Nothing else. And my view is that's crazy. I mean, fertilizer is national security,
Sure.
right? I mean, if you don't have fertilizer, you don't have food. And if you don't have food supply and you can't feed your troops, then you have a real problem. If you can't feed the population, you have a problem. So to me, national security, it's a broad concept. I think it includes food security, including our herds, whether they be lamb or beef. I think it's the way we think about it. We just want to position the United States not only to have good jobs and help people like you, continue your livelihood, but we also want the United States to be very well placed for whatever the next big shock is, right? We've seen pandemics, we've seen wars, all these things nobody thought we'd have to face in our day and age. We're facing them, right? And there may be more in the future. And so we have to be ready for that.
Absolutely. And that goes back to a country that can't feed itself, can't defend itself. Early on in this, when I really started first communicating with USTR, was actually under the Biden administration, is where things really, really got bad for the sheep industry. And I reached out to a good friend of mine, John Huntsman Jr., and we started talking about tariff rate quotas and how President Reagan used tariff rate quotas on the Japanese steel industry to kind of resurrect the American steel industry. How do you think tariff rate quotas, I mean, for the sheep industry, we've always believed that works great because it gives us a chance to rebuild the herd without escalating the cost of the goods to the consumers here. Do you see TRQs really taking a place in this administration, or are you just kind of working straight forward?
Yeah, well, and I don't want to. I'm not speaking about the 201 because it's an ongoing legal process, but just as a general concept, TRQs are something that we have used. We used them in the first term for certain things. Right now, we have some in place. We have an autos deal with the UK that's a TRQ, and I think there is room for that kind of tool because there are a few things we're trying to accomplish with our trade policy. One of these is to get the broader trade deficit down. And so that does mean saying, hey, well, we'll accept trade up to a certain point, but once it gets out of balance, there should be some kind of deterrent or control on it. And a tariff can do that, right? So you have a quota for part of it, then a tariff afterwards. I think certain commodities lend themselves more to that. And by the way, in the ag world, TRQs are kind of standard practice, right? So, I mean, we recently made some trade deals with other countries where we had no market access before, and now they've given us TRQs, right? So this is actually a standard tool, and it's one that can be used on the one hand if we're looking for market access overseas, or on the other hand to control imports here.
Yeah, and that's really what we've always seen here. And Canada's done it for a long time. They have prevented a lot of imports into their country to protect like their dairy industry and a lot of their meat industries. And so I appreciate the employment of those going forward. I know we're short on time, but I mean, you're with the president all the time. How's he feeling about the trade? How do you feel about the trade? And what do you guys want to see happen over the next couple of years?
Well, we're both really impatient. Is the number one thing because we've lived with decades of having unfair trade relationships with our partners, whether it's lack of access to their markets or flood of imports from them based on, structural excess capacity or unfair subsidies or you name it. And so we're trying to right that ship, but it's a problem that had gone on for decades, and so it's hard to do it overnight. Every time I talk to the president, he says, "Oh, Jameson, we only have 2.5 years left. We have to move. We have to move." So we're on the right path. We've had some legal ups and downs with some of our actions, but by and large, lots of them have stayed in place. We have new things coming online right now, and we're having a lot of success. People thought that trade was going to collapse. Our trade deficit year on year has gone down substantially. Our exports. I know that's not necessarily something that the lamb world is looking at, but for other places, we're looking at exports. Our exports are up. So trade has not collapsed. To the contrary, we're protecting ag and manufacturing again. We're getting better access overseas. We have jobs for blue collar workers are going up, right? That's kind of my metric, right? I'm not necessarily looking as are the rich getting richer like that. That I'm less interested in. I'm more interested in what does it look like for the blue collar folks, and we see blue collar wages and people like on the line, not even the managers. Their wages going up last year by $2,000 to $3,000, and also going up more than inflation. Obviously, we've had an issue in the past few months with energy, right, given the Straits of Hormuz. But other than that, the fundamentals are really good. We're seeing manufacturing coming back. We're seeing wages going up. We're seeing productivity skyrocket. So I think we're on the right path. We're impatient. We want to move quicker and do more.
And I can only imagine working with the president, how it feels at what speed in which he wants to move and the speed of government.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And it's and I have, my agency USTR, it's a great agency. It's amazing. And these folks are working super hard to protect American producers and make sure we're treated fairly globally. And they're working around the clock every day. And some of them could be out there making big bucks in the private sector, but they're doing public service right now, and I think they're making a big difference in changing the global order to the benefit of Americans.
Amen to that, brother. Well, thank you for joining me. I know you've got to get, but thanks again, and we look forward to seeing you here shortly.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you. Thank you.
Yep, you too.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, hit that like button, subscribe to the podcast, and make sure you turn on your notifications so you know when we release a new episode. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all soon.